This video is about the National Citizens Inquiry, its body and structure, and some of the people involved. And I just want to draw your attention to this legend that I made here because there are certain words in which I will have to avoid using in order to keep this video on YouTube. So, first off, I want to say that Rebel News did a piece on the National Citizens Inquiry where Tamara Ugolini of Rebel News interviewed Michelle Leduc-Catlin of the National Citizens Inquiry, and Tamara describes the NCI as a independent, citizen-led inquiry into the unprecedented federal and provincial government's DVOC-19 related policies and response plans. And Michelle describes it as a citizen-led, citizen-funded inquiry into the government's response to DVOC-19. Michelle says that the commissioners were nominated, approached, and applied, and were to give an honest and objective opinion that Canadian citizens would trust. And she describes the structure like a public inquiry where commissioners are listening to testimony under oath, taking notes, and collecting evidence from the lawyers who are presenting the case. And they'll submit a report at the end of this with recommendations for what we did right or wrong and what could be done better and how to proceed in future. And Michelle says that the Emergency Act Commission, which she's referring to the Truck Convoys Emergency Act Inquiry, she says that the Emergency Act Commission was the government inspecting the government. But this, the NCI, is a historic process and a historic moment, and she describes this as a chance to quote-unquote flex our democratic muscles, if you say so, Michelle. So I definitely have more to comment on that particular commentary, but first I want to say here that on November 2nd, 2022, in Canada's capital, which is Ottawa, Preston Manning made the announcement about the National Citizens Inquiry being launched. It says here he's the former leader of the official opposition and member of Parliament. He's also friends with former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who's a member of the Committee of 300. The Committee of 300 pretty much exceeds the Bilderberg and Trilateral Commission in terms of its level of hierarchy. And in particular, we can see some of the particular groups that are supporting the inquiry as told by this slide here are Police on Guard for Thee, Canada Marches, which is James Topp, Vets for Freedom, VCC, and TBOF are Taking Back Our Freedoms. One of the board members of Taking Back Our Freedoms, by the way, is Dr. Laura Braden, who actually served during the National Citizens Inquiry. She was interviewed, and in particular here, it says that the NCI, once again, sorry to be repetitive, but you will see why eventually. They say it's a citizen-led and citizen-funded initiative that is completely independent from government. Not all is always as it seems, though. So in early 2023, the NCI will hear from Canadians and experts and investigate government's DVOC-19 policies in a fair and impartial manner. So these are the commissioners, and in particular, starting off with Dr. Bernard Massey, who graduated in microbiology and immunology from University of Montreal in 1982, and he's worked at the National Research Council of Canada, which is actually part of ISED in particular, which is a ministry of government that was renamed and restructured, formerly Industry Canada, and he currently serves as an independent consultant in biotechnology. Ken Drysdale here, it mentions that he's an experienced engineer, but I'm not sure what kind of engineer he is. And then Janice in particular, it says that she's worked with vulnerable populations and youth, and she holds degrees in island studies, English and political science, and public admin, and she's taught in both K-12 and post-secondary education. And her research specialization involves the intersection of public policy and the social fabric, which has led Janice to pursue a PhD in theology and discipleship. and she served as a researcher on the PEI Task Force for Student Achievement, as coordinator for Canadian Blood Services, and was a contributing member to the Supply Chain Management Sector Council. So she has an interesting, versatile background from what I can see. And then Heather here is a senior law partner at a regional law firm located in Calgary, Alberta. And she has nearly 20 years of experience in the areas of tax planning and dispute resolution, which involves assisting her clients to navigate the complex and ever-evolving Canadian tax landscape. She's past executive member of each of the Canadian Bar Association, taxation specialist, and the Canadian Petroleum Tax Society. Interesting. So, in particular, this is the Citizens Inquiry Canada, which is a non-profit corporation that provides a legal framework for the National Citizens Inquiry Initiative. So the NCI is the initiative put forth, but Citizens Inquiry Canada is the registered corporation that is overseeing the legal framework of this initiative. So there's 2 members listed on the board of directors here. I'll talk about David Ross a little bit further into the video, but first, Chess Crosby is a longtime member of the Bar of Newfoundland who has been entrusted by voters to represent them in leadership positions in the legislature, and his volunteer activities include the Atlantic Charter Foundation, which commemorates the August 1941 meeting in Newfoundland waters of wartime leaders Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt, who are both Freemasons, by the way, who famously told the free world, "We have nothing to fear except fear itself." So now we're going to dive into the surname Crosby in particular and what that means. So in particular, here's a family crest, and the original Gaelic form of the Irish name Crosby was written in this particular manner, which was derived from this word, which means cross. And I have 0 Gaelic blood, and I don't want to try pronounce something that I really just can't pronounce. They were, the Crosby clan in particular were an offshoot of the notable Clan O'More, which was the leading set of the 7 clans of Lay. And in Gaelic, the particular surname was more frequently seen in the English form Crosby, or Crosby spelled either way, which was listed as early as the 1600s. And if you want to look at some of the variations of spelling and such, feel free to look at this article, as links will be in the description. And there are some interesting descriptions of different members of the Crosby family. So John Carnell Crosby is actually Chess Crosby's father, who is Newfoundland born, and he is a Canadian provincial and federal politician, or rather was, as he passed away. The 12th Lieutenant Governor of Newfoundland and Labrador, and the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, and Sir John Chalker Crosby, Newfoundland merchant and politician, and Prime Minister of Newfoundland. And then you have Chess Crosby here, the Newfoundland businessman and politician, who was the delegate to Newfoundland National Convention and favored responsible government, and was the father of John Crosby. So Chess Crosby has had an interesting background, and his family is arguably even more interesting than he is, as his father was again a cabinet minister who served under different premiers in Newfoundland when Joe Clark and Brian Mulroney were the prime minister. And he served as the lieutenant governor and was also a member of the Order of Canada. And Chess's grandfather was involved in politics, and his great-grandfather was as well, as being knighted. And Crosby belonged to a prominent St. John's family that was generally involved in hotels, fish exporting, insurance, shipping, and manufacturing. So he comes from a line of wealth, and where his father was brought into the Order of Canada, and his grandfather was knighted. So those high honors given by government or crown are generally dishonors to we the people. And I don't look high to those kinds of crests any more highly than I look at something like Freemasonry in its current form. So this is the Citizens Inquiry Canada, which is the corporation in of itself overseeing the legal framework of the NCI. And the three directors that are listed are David Ross, Preston Manning, and Andrei Litvinenko, which I will be looking at Andrei a little bit. In particular, this is the Youth Diplomats of Canada, and bear in mind that the bio given about him is from 2016 in particular, and this had to do with the World Bank and International Monetary Fund annual meetings, interestingly enough, and you'll see why when I talk a little bit about the Youth Diplomats of Canada in the next slide. But basically, Andrei takes an interest in space and economic policy, and it says here that he is a policy analyst for ISED, but bearing in mind that this was written in 2016, I don't believe that the information is 100% current. So, in particular, the Young Diplomats of Canada, it's described as a national non-partisan non-profit organization that promotes the leadership of young Canadians through international delegations, research projects, and advocacy initiatives. Well, some of these particular groups in particular are high-level geopolitical and global governance summits. That includes the World Bank and IMF, the United Nations, Youth 20, Youth 7, etc. And they publish research and commentary on public and global affairs and partner with the UFT's Monk School of Global Affairs G20 research group. The Monk School has a specialty in dealing with public policy from my understanding, and I believe this was mentioned in my video about Jordan Peterson or Vets for Freedom, so I'd recommend checking out those videos in particular if you have questions about the Monk School in particular, or the Monk Ward and what that is. So, in particular here, it says, Andrei is a proud alumni of the University of Ottawa's Faculty of Law and has been a committed volunteer to Ottawa's community for a decade, raising funds for underprivileged youth through the Fund for a New Generation, prepping meals for the less fortunate of Shepherds of Good Hope, and providing pro bono legal services as counsel with Pro Bono Ontario, and he's a member of the Law Society of Ontario. So, volunteering in particular, it sounds like this guy seems like a very good man, you know, but when it comes down to volunteer work and dealing with poverty or volunteering at food banks and stuff, this is no different than what Masons or high-level corporate executives do just to have a good public image, essentially. So, again, it says here that he's an analyst for ISED, although I don't think that that is current. It says that he worked as a member of parliament for 4 years, advising on the aerospace, space, and clean tech sectors. Then he served as the Center for Trade Law and Policy as a trade policy associate, and in the Prime Minister's office as a finance policy intern. Interesting. Okay? And in particular, this link here about Andrei talks about a little bit more current information. It says that he is in the Department of Indigenous Services Canada, and it says that he is a senior advisor to the Assistant Deputy Minister, Council, Infrastructure, and Commercial, Ottawa and Toronto, Ontario, and this is according to the Serbian-Canadian Professionals in Law. So, Department of Indigenous Services Canada, I cannot think of how that would be relevant in particular to the inquiry, but the thing is here, as I could see, he is a current registered employee with Indigenous Services Canada, and his position title is Senior Advisor. This is deceptive because we were told that this was a citizen-led inquiry, and Andre is one of the directors and is still employed working with government. So therefore, either these are blatant lies, we are told, or we are just, at the very least, totally misled, because we're told that the truck convoy, the emergency inquiry, was government investigating government, and in particular, I can't see how this would be any different if you have a member of government on board, frankly. It's just, you're controlling the narrative in a very different manner of speaking is all, which I'll get to a little bit later, of course. You know, it seems like the ball of fear is passed around back and forth, in particular talking about, say, there was a lot of fear revolving around DVOC 19 in order to make people get the juice, and now there's a sense of fear about the adverse reactions from taking the juice. And believe me, I do not advocate for the juice in particular, but what I am just getting at in particular is that the truth lies somewhere in the middle, and that the element of fear is what is being passed around to either side of the narrative, essentially. Very much like a Masonic checkerboard floor. So, the directors of Canadian Care Alliance, again, I'm not going to say the word of this particular corporation, David Ross is one of the members, who I said I would touch on eventually. And then CC Telehealth Inc. in particular, we see David Ross once again, and he's just listed under a different profile. You can have multiple profiles on the OpenGov platform, to my knowledge. You know, Kellyanne Wolf, Kellyanne Farkas, David Ross, David A. Ross. So, this group here, it says it is a volunteer-run organization with over 700 Canadian physicians, researchers, healthcare practitioners, and legal and ethical professionals, and it includes various types of doctors and other professions revolving around the medical field. And in particular, a little bio about David Ross here. He is a chartered professional accountant, active in ethics leadership of his profession nationally for more than 20 years and provincially for more than 25 years. David also served as the sole community representative on the New Brunswick Horizon Healthcare Research Ethics Board from 2018 to 2022. And some of the members of the Scientific and Medical Advisory Committee here, interestingly enough, are, well, one of the directors, Dr. Byron Bridle, whose name we've heard quite a bit, and as well Dr. Bernard Massey, who's one of the commissioners running the inquiry in particular. So, interesting. And then this is Horizon Health Network. I'll just read a little bit about it so you have a little bit more background information about what David Ross did and who he was working for. Horizon is the largest regional health network in New Brunswick and the second largest health authority in Atlantic Canada. Horizon operates 12 hospitals and more than 100 medical facilities, clinics, and offices throughout New Brunswick. Horizon provides services ranging from acute and specialized care to community-based health services. With a collaborative team approach to offering services in English and French, Horizon delivers sustainable, safe, and quality healthcare services to the residents of New Brunswick as well as northern Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. So, now I'm going to talk about the Canada Strong and Free Network. What is that in particular? Well, this is Preston Manning's organization. The Canada Strong and Free Network was founded in 2005 as the Manning Centre for Building Democracy to support Canada's conservative movement by networking best practices and ideas pertaining to limited government, free enterprise, individual responsibility, and a more robust civil society. Name change took place at the request of the organization's founder, Preston Manning, in 2020. It was formerly known as the Manning Institute, as the Manning Center. And it says here that Preston Manning is the founder and the only leader of the Reform Party of Canada, a Canadian federal political party that evolved into the Canadian Alliance, which in turn merged into the Federal Progressive Conservative Party to form today's Conservative Party of Canada. Okay? And then this is a little bit about Preston Manning. Founder and only leader of the Reform Party, a Canadian federal party that evolved into the Canadian Alliance, which in turn merged with the Canadian Conservative Party to form today's Conservative Party of Canada, as I said. Now, Manning represented the federal constituency of Calgary Southwest in the Canadian House of Commons from 1993 until 2002, and he served as the leader of the official opposition from 1997 to 2000, and upon his retirement from elected office, he founded the Manning Foundation for Democratic Education and the Manning Center for Building Democracy, not-for-profit organizations dedicated to strengthening Canadian democracy in accordance with conservative principles. Manning has received the Queen's Privy Council for Canada, the Order of Canada, and the Alberta Order of Excellence. So once again, somebody else that is brought into the Order of Canada as well. And anybody with the Honorable in front of their name has been brought into the Canadian Privy Council. So this is the Fraser Institute. I'm not going to talk so much about it, but I just want to bring up the fact that Preston Manning did attend the Fraser Institute. It says here, although this is dated, that he is serving, or rather he served as a senior fellow of the Fraser Institute and president and CEO of the Manning Center for Building Democracy. Okay, so here's the big joke about some of the organizations I have mentioned. In particular, Canada Strong and Free Network, which is formerly known as the Manning Center, as well as Fraser Institute. So all of these 12 organizations here are funded by the Atlas Network, which is a think tank that is largely funded by the Koch family. So you have the Fraser Institute, where we can see Preston Manning was at, and as well the head of Rebel News, Ezra Levant, has attended. You have the JCCF in particular, as we've seen in the Freedom Movement, the Montreal Economic Institute, where Maxime Bernier used to work, and then of course the Manning Center. So what we have here is somebody who was essentially in the Koch family's pocket, Preston Manning, that is running the inquiry, along with Andrei Litvinenko, who is a government employee. And if this is supposed to be citizen-led, then that is a complete contradiction. And yes, I know the real definition of the word citizen essentially means slave if you dive into the nuts and bolts of it, but I don't think that that is the intention of the writing beyond saying something is citizen-led in this case. However, what I will say in particular is that that is still a contradiction, because you do have a federal government employee that is helping organize this and is one of the directors of Citizens Inquiry Canada. So with government being directly involved, how can you expect government and its ministries actually be held accountable? Plus, government and its ministries in Canada are simply puppets to the United Nations and their agenda. So I don't see how we could possibly be holding government accountable using their methods, either their courtrooms or an inquiry such as this in particular. I don't see how this is going to move anything forward, especially considering some of the backing in particular that the National Citizens Inquiry actually has, as well as Citizens Inquiry Canada. So, all in all, it seems very much like people are just bought and paid for that are running this. And I can't tell you if this is a distraction or something that is actually leading somewhere. But if it is going in any sort of direction, it's not a direction in which I'd like to see things go, most likely. So, anyway, I'm just going to close with this one in particular here and just say that you probably shouldn't trust anybody if they were in the Koch family's pocket, because when it comes down to the Koch family, which is known as conservative family, and then you have George Soros, who is known as a liberal, if you will, those are just spectrums of illusion, and the left and the right play off each other all the time, and it's just a matter of throwing the ball back and forth, just like Anti-Hate Canada and Rebel News do all the time. So, thanks for watching, everyone, and let me know what you think and ask what you like in the comments.